Paramanandi Hari Hari Bol.
Hare Krishna. Herzlich willkommen zu unserem Sonntagsprogramm hier im Krishna-Tempel in Zürich. Gibt es für jemanden ein Problem, wenn ich auf Englisch weiterspreche? Verstehen alle Englisch? Okay. So then also in English. Warm welcome to all our guests. Thank you very much for coming to join our today's Sunday program here in the Krishna Temple in Zurich. Just brief information. So right now we'll have a class followed by a vegetarian feast at 5 o'clock, a japa mantra meditation workshop from 6:15 on, and then at 7 there will be a temple ceremony, and from 8 to 9:30 there will be more kirtan like we just had now. And today we're very happy to have with us again His Grace Akhananda Prabhu. He will give the lecture today on the very interesting topic of beyond Vedanta, beyond dualism and non-dualism. That will be the topic, so Prabhu will speak about that. And Akhananda Prabhu is a disciple of our founder, Srila Prabhupada. He's been practicing Bhakti Yoga since the 70s and has served in many different ways, both in the UK and abroad. And in recent years, he has been more involved also in our Zurich Yatra. We're very thankful for that. And he's very much specialized in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness, in the scientific aspects of Krishna consciousness. And he's also actually headed up this program of Scientific Saturdays that we have here going on. Every second Saturday in the morning Srimad Bhagavatam class, he speaks on these topics of Krishna consciousness and science. And I also wanted to invite you for these programs. They're always taking place every second Saturday, and actually next Saturday, the 4th of March, there'll be another lecture, and all the infos on what is the topic is outside in the vitrine also. So without further ado, please Akhananda Prabhu, thank you very much for coming. Es wird auch eine Übersetzung geben auf Deutsch für diejenigen, die das wünschen. Falls jemand hier ist, der gerne eine Übersetzung hätte, könnten wir das anbieten. Ansonsten ist auch gut.
Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Prabhupada ki jai. Shri Gauranatai ki Gaura Prema. Hare Krishna. How many of you are coming here for a first time? Yeah? Okay, so a few things are a little strange, and I apologize, I should have introduced that last little song that we do just before giving a class. But today's topic is beyond duality and non-duality. And I think this is an important subject for our path in spiritual life. Prabhupada was once joking about this idea of intelligence. And he told the story of two friends who were chatting together. And one says to the other, "Are you intelligent?" And the other one goes, "Why are you checking your pockets?" He said, "Well, if I'm actually intelligent, there'll be money in my pockets." So that's one definition of intelligence, knowing how to look after one's cash. But Prabhupada was using it to explain that there are deeper meanings of intelligence. And in one of our scriptures, the Srimad Bhagavatam, it mentions three very important factors of intelligence. And they're a little surprising. The first one is samshaya, which means doubting. Doubting. Now that's surprising, isn't it? You wouldn't expect that being able to doubt something is necessarily a function of intelligence. But actually, knowledge begins when we question. If we simply just take everything for granted in life and just assume that life's just happening and I'm just part of it and that's just the way it is, then that's, how are we going to gain anything? How will anything ever change for us? We're just kind of moving along, swept along with the flow of our life. Now, that may be fine for some people. But actually, human beings have a hard time just accepting that things are the way they are. We have a hard time. We doubt. And this leads to the next factor of intelligence, viparyashva, which basically is to do with misapprehension. Now, how is misunderstanding something a function of intelligence? That seems strange as well. But what this is asking you to understand is that most of the time, whatever we think is correct could be wrong. It could be a misapprehension. And unless you recognize what are your misapprehensions, how are you ever going to understand what is correct apprehension? Nishchaya, the third element. So doubt. Find out what your misconceptions are, and then establish what is the right conception about yourself and your life, why you are here. So doubting begins when we kind of find that things in this world aren't quite as we might want them to be. And there's different categories of that. You know, every day we go through different circumstances wishing we could change how this person is behaving or how this is happening or how I'm able to do this. You know, we always wish there's different ways that things are working out for us. But obviously here we're talking on a bigger platform. We're talking something longer term. And our doubts start to manifest from feelings in things that aren't quite right, aren't quite compatible with us. And the big one for humans is our sense of mortality. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem right that I should stop existing. I'm here, I'm now experiencing, I'm existing, I'm conscious, I'm sentient, I'm aware of everything, and I'm enjoying that awareness. Why would that stop? That doesn't seem right that it should stop. Surely I cannot be the thing that where my consciousness just stops. So that's samshaya. I'm doubting. Am I just this material object that exists for a while and then stops functioning like a machine? It's broken, just isn't doing its thing anymore, and that's the end of me, the conscious being? That doesn't seem... if that's right, it doesn't feel right. If that's the truth, I don't like it. I want to explore that one a bit more. It just doesn't feel right that should be the situation. Now, if I am just a machine, why doesn't it feel right that the machine should stop? But there's something in me that's telling me that's not quite right. I wish I knew everything. Knowledge is important. Knowledge helps me achieve my goals and to get the things I want in life. But there's blocks to my knowledge. Why is that? How can I get better knowledge of all of this? And of course, I just want to be happy. That's my real driver. I just want to be happy. Different things make us happy. Different things make different people happy. But basically that's a driver. But there again seems to be something incompatible with this flow of my life that is making me question that I'm not getting the pleasure that I want. I'm not getting the satisfaction. I'm not getting the fulfillment. There's a lot of stuff out there which is blocking me. So these are the three basic senses of samshaya. I'm beginning to doubt that I am just this material object. Because if I was a material object, I don't think I'd be as bothered about these three items. They wouldn't be that crucial to me. Now, of course, there's theories such as, the kind of Darwinian mood of survival of the fittest, and that we have this survival instinct. Yeah, we do have a survival instinct. We certainly do. But where's that coming from? Machines don't want it. If I'm just a material organism, why is that important to me? A bunch of chemicals. But survival, continuation of my existence, and particularly continuation of my ability to enjoy. These are the crucial things that I'm searching for. And then I look out in the world and I see there's a lot of stuff out there which I'm really questioning. And we often categorize these in kind of the dualities of the world. Feed me some dualities that you see in this world that might bother you. Cold, hot, cold, yeah.
Rich and poor.
Rich and poor.
Birth and death.
Birth and death.
Good and bad.
Good and bad, exactly, yes.
Disease.
Disease and health.
Honor, dishonor.
Honor, dishonor. And then there's all the ideological ones as well, isn't there? Right wing, left wing, capitalist, communist, And then there's the religious ones, isn't it? Believers and atheists, There's dualities everywhere, extremes. And when we look at this, it's no wonder we start to question, there's got to be something more than all of this. And the Vedanta philosophy asks us to be thoughtful, to give regard to your doubts, to ask you to explore what could be your misconceptions about yourself and about this world in order to come to a correct perception. So maybe some of you have heard of this phrase in Sanskrit, neti neti. It means not this, not this. It's a way of analyzing the world and thinking, well, I am the observer of my body. Maybe I am not my body. I am the conscious being observing my body. I am the conscious being observing my thoughts and experiencing the emotions in my mind. Perhaps I am different from my mind. Now, what about all of you? You're also conscious beings. How do we relate? You know, at the moment, we see people relating very poorly, generally, amongst each other. And is that because I am worried about me as an individual? I'm not treating you as an individual in the right way? So we kind of want to overcome these dualities that seem to be stifling our happiness. And the Vedas start to give us this picture that actually you are right to be worried about who you are in this world and what you're experiencing. You are right to be dissatisfied because you are so much more than what you think you are at this time. So much more. You are a spiritual being, an entity of consciousness, not of matter. You are composed of these three factors: Sat, Chit, Ananda. Sat, beingness, eternity. You are something which never dies, always exists. That's the nature of consciousness. Chit, you have the ability to be full of knowledge. Of course you're going to be dissatisfied with what you're learning in school. You have the possibility of Ananda. That is your nature, to be totally blissful. You're not meant to put up with the pains of this body. You're not meant to have to deal with the troubles that others give you, mentally, physically, whatever. You're not meant to have to go through all of that. You are so much more. So this picture starts to help us realize that actually I am a pure spiritual being, a thing of consciousness. And actually my inherent nature is this eternity, knowledge and pleasure, Ananda. So that becomes the first concept, because until you come to this concept of being a spiritual being, distinct from the material world around you, no further progress can be made in spiritual life. Now, is this the final word on it? Not quite. Actually, not by a long shot. This is a foundation, not a final destination. Because until we understand what we are not, we cannot understand what we are. So, the first step in spiritual life is actually to come to this point that I am distinct from the dualities of this material world. I am a non-dual being, spiritual being of consciousness. Now, when we think of that, then there is a tendency to come to certain realizations. And for instance, one of the realizations might be in thinking about, okay, if I'm a spiritual being and all the others are spiritual being, I am spirit, great. Now what does that mean for me and God? God is spirit, I'm spirit. Does that mean that I am one with God? And it is natural when one progresses in through these stages of realization, to consider, well, what does this mean for my relationship with what I've called religion? You know, I remember writing an essay in my 6th form at school. It's, you know, what age would that be? 17, I suppose. And explaining to the RE teacher that, yeah, humans go through an evolution of understanding of God. You know, they see fire and lightning on the mountain and think these are the gods at play, you know. This is pantheism. Or pantheism rather, so pantheism that this is nature as God. And then we kind of, people come to the idea, well, maybe there are personalities, gods, controlling those forces of nature. And then you kind of have these ideas of polytheism. And then, of course, Western theology would say, no, we've got all past that. We've come to monotheism. We've come to the idea of one God. And others will then realize, well, wait a minute, your kind of theories of monotheism tend to be very rooted in the materialism of this world, thinking that God's only purpose is the creation of matter, and that having created matter, he created us in it. Surely that's the result of all the dualities that we see. That cannot be right. So beyond this monotheistic idea of God, maybe there is this monist theory that God is simply energy, light, the supreme love, the supreme energy, Brahman in Vedic terms. So that's the natural kind of development of one's ideas, that ultimately we are talking about a oneness of all existence of which I am part. And anyone who comes to that kind of realization as part of their progression should be celebrated. It's quite a realization. I'm going to ask a question to all of you. How many of you in your spiritual journey, at some point, whether now or in the past, kind of found yourself with this concept that I am just one part, I am one with the totalness of all existence, God, oneness? How many of you had that? Yeah. It's natural. It's almost, I'm not saying it's absolutely required, can't be, because everyone can come to conclusions differently, but it's very natural for that to be part of your path. How many of you have actually felt that you've had some event which really crystallized, I am one with all existence? How many of you have actually had that experience? How many of you were as high as hell when you did it? I'm not going to tell my story. But it involves sitting on a rock in Ireland on the Irish Sea early one morning, the waves all around me, and just, yeah, I got it. I'm just one with everything. It was blissful, very blissful, I have to say, very, very blissful. And it's an important realization. I'm not trying to make fun of it, please. It was seminal in spiritual progress. But when one actually then starts to kind of analyze, yes, all right, but how do I live that? What does that mean for my behavior? How do I relate to the world? Okay, what is the world in this case? If everything is simply God, energy, oneness, then what is this stuff here? Now, it's either real or it's not real. Those who want to establish oneness as being the all in all tend to follow the guidance of Shankaracharya, who is probably the most prominent monist theologian. And he commented on Vedanta. And he had a phrase, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. How many of you have heard that? How many of you think it's a Vedic term? No. It's not a Vedic. It's not a Vedanta. It's not Upanishads. It's Shankaracharya's own words. It's his idea. And of course, any teacher is welcome to come up with his own phrases for his own teaching purposes. That doesn't necessarily give it Vedic authority. So his idea is that spirit, that's real. That's Satyam. But the world is unreal. Now, how do you live that? Now, I used to run a retreat centre in Wales for 20 odd years. And we were open doors. We would welcome any group, you know, any background. And most of them were in the spiritual, alternative, personal growth fields. So we had a number of, I suppose, high-profile, non-dual philosophers renting us for their classes. And it always was very interesting to me and the staff how groups would be lectured on the non-existence of the world around them, the importance of realizing that none of this exists, it's all just an illusion. But when they came in for lunch, God help us if there wasn't enough salad. You know? So and Krishna makes his point that your relationship with the world is important and you need to understand it, and living it according to this idea that it doesn't exist, that can't be right. I remember one of the teachers, actually, in one group, she and her husband ran this group every year. Again, it was a group focusing on non-duality and yoga. And at one point, she knew I was, you know, with the Krishnas and, you know, had interest in philosophy. And so we'd often have some good chats. And one time she came to me and said, tell me this. If we're all one, if I'm you and you are me and, you know, we're all just one, how does reincarnation work? That's a good question. How does reincarnation of you as an individual work if I am you and you are me and what I see in you is me? I think that's Pink Floyd. No, that's not Bhagavatam. That's not Vedas either. Probably Roger Waters. So, how does it work? And that was a very important question. How can a world of illusion allow us to be fooled into thinking I am this body and then going through reincarnation? How can the oneness of God be divided into different components? How does that work? So this is the challenge. Although the concept that I am Brahman, I am spirit, and that God is spirit, although that is sound, that doesn't necessarily mean that I am the total aspect of God. I am Angsha, Krishna says. Each one of us is just Angsha, a little part. It's like if I say, I'm British, and the king is British. Therefore, I'm the king. No, I'm a British subject. Just one little subject. And the king's the king. So, this is where I suppose Krishna consciousness begs you that when you start the spiritual train, particularly the train of Vedanta, don't get off at the first stop. The first stop is monism. Stay on the train. There is so much more to come. You are yes, you are spirit. Yes, you are one in quality, in Brahmanness, in spiritualness with God. That thou art, tat tvamasi, aham brahmasmi, I am Brahman. Those are all absolutely correct. But they can't be misinterpreted to fool ourselves even more. We're already fooled that I think I'm this body, that I will live and I will die. That is my foolishness. I am so limited that I am willing to fall for that ignominy, that mistake. Don't fall for another mistake and think that I am therefore God. I may not be this, I may not be the body, but that doesn't then allow me to fall for another misconception that I could be the supreme or part of the supreme. I am just a little individual entity. So this is why Bhagavad Gita stresses right at the beginning that Tvevaham Natu Nasham, that never was there a time when you did not exist as you. Now, of course, sometimes we don't like that idea of continuing to exist as me, because I may not like me, or I may have real doubts about certain aspects of my nature. And this is again where spiritual life needs to be to avoid conflation. When we say we're the spirit soul, the conscious entity, we have to separate that from our persona selves. Because as a spiritual conscious being, we are identifying with this body. And therefore we are thinking of ourselves in terms of this body. And we're thinking of ourselves in terms of our position in society, with family, with work, with whatever else is going on. And we're defining all these things we think about ourselves, which we're basically adding on to it. We are that individual conscious entity. We are unique, we are individual, but we're not really 100% clear about who we are as the spiritual self, because we have allowed the spiritual self to be covered over with all the other factors about life around us and life in this body. And therefore we have so many misconceptions, and we have accepted those as the ahankara, the false self. So again, this is where we would agree with Shankara and other teachers, that we actually have to address the problems that we're generating for ourselves because of my false identification. But I can only have a false identification if there's a real one. So what is the real identification of consciousness? That becomes our question. How can we identify that? In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives a very interesting analogy. He says, there's a tree which has its roots growing up to reach the earth, and its branches are going down. Now, have you ever seen such a tree? I think some of you have. Where would you see such a tree? When you look into the water, yes. If you see flat water, and say there's a bit of land on the other side of the river or lake, you can see a tree there. If you look at it in the water, you will see a tree in this nice calm water, and the roots are going up and the branches are going down. That is Krishna's analogy for this world. Bimba. It's a reflection. Now, is that reflection real or not? yeah, it's both. It is real. You're experiencing it. You can see it. But if you tried to touch it, you would not feel the bark of the tree in the water. You would not be able to pick the leaves from the image that you're seeing. So it looks really good. So what this is telling us is that what we take to be real in this world is there. But it exists because it is a reflection of spiritual reality. So this is a challenge to us to get over this idea that if I'm just consciousness, if God is just consciousness, if the realm of consciousness is just consciousness, then it's just light. That's all it can be. Because it can't have any of these things. These things are material. These are objects. It can't have anything like that in it. It can't have a body in it, because that's just a biological object. So the spiritual kind of realm can only just be light. And this is the difficulty that we have. Being conditioned in this world, trying to understand the realm of pure consciousness, the spiritual realm. So that is why the first thing we have to do is to come to the platform of understanding not matter, spirit. The spiritual world is spirit, it is not matter. But what we cannot do then is take our material concepts from this world into the spiritual world. And that's why we kind of think, well, I can't take forms because they're part of the material world. There can't be anything with form because that would be divisive, that would be duality. I can't bring these into the spiritual world. That's a natural bit of logic, but it fails. Because the problem is, form doesn't exist in the material world. Form is not an inherent property of matter. Form is an inherent property of consciousness. Think about clay. What would turn clay into a beautiful vase, pot? What turns clay into a pot? The consciousness of the potter, yes. The knowledge, the skill, the intention. Form is given to matter by consciousness. That's the secret that takes you beyond non-duality into the incredible spiritual realm of non-dual consciousness with form. Form is a product of consciousness. What about activities? Are you going to be just blissed out in this white light forever? With nothing to do? Just ecstatic, Anand, Paramanand? No? Activities. Would consciousness get up to anything in the realm of pure consciousness? Well, again, are activities inherent in matter? Has this thing moved? Got up to anything while I've not been looking at it?
The consciousness that moves it.
Consciousness is the impetus for action. But don't you need time for things to happen? Doesn't time have to be there? How could there be time in the spiritual world if everything is eternal? It should be, things are eternal, that means they're fixed, isn't it? No. Again, the difficulty is when you're just using simple logic of what you think the material world is, and you apply that to the spiritual kind of realm, it gets messed up. That's why you've got to come to the point where realizing, no, it's different. And I need to be free to understand this. Time, it's not that activities need time to happen. Activities need intention to happen. And the spiritual world is activities which are caused by the intentions of the individual beings there. In the same way, actually, as everything is happening in this world, thanks to the intentions. We say it's facilitated by time, and that's just one way of explaining the material world. But things can be eternal and happen. Different things can happen in eternity. Now that's maybe a hard one for us to conceive, because eternity is a tough one to conceive of, isn't it? You wait for the bus at the top of the road, it seems like an eternity, when it's raining. Eternity is hard, but eternity doesn't mean stasis. It doesn't mean things are static. It doesn't mean nothing can happen. So this is a huge topic that we're exploring now. Why there is reason and rationale to kind of go beyond a very simplistic, almost naive monism into the world of diversity of spiritual existence, where consciousness remains individual. You will always be you. You'll be a better version of you. You'll be the real version of you. And you'll like that version of you. And that version of you will make you very, very happy. Why? Because in that version of you, in pure consciousness, you are doing the one thing that you know is the real fulfillment. Love. Pure consciousness can love. Consciousness, when wrapped up in the ahankara, the false identification, has a hard time showing actual love. We just tend to be a little too selfish, a little too wrapped up in what I think I need, what I want to get out of this situation or this relationship, and not willing to give enough of ourselves. So, again, just because we're lousy at actually showing real love in this world doesn't mean that I need to become you in order to love in the spiritual world. Again, that's the kind of non-dual kind of concept, that if I am you, then that's real union. We're one. Well, yeah. Is that love? Is it as ecstatic as love? Vedanta, the Upanishad said, nope, that's not as ecstatic as love. You can reach a stage where you feel such, in Brahmananda, there is a state of trance in which you as a spiritual conscious being can transcend any concept of being material, and you can feel that you are exactly the same as all those other conscious beings around you. And that is a state of Brahmananda. And that the bliss expressed in that is phenomenal. I mean, it's beyond anything we can conceive. But the Vedas say, yeah, it's so phenomenal. But if you compare it to the opportunity for the soul to love purely, then that pleasure of Brahmananda is like the amount of water that you could find in the hoof print of a calf. Just a little hoof print, palmful of water, compared to the ocean of love. Because the ocean of love keeps on growing. Because once we establish ourselves in the pure, loving consciousness of the spiritual realm, then that the interactions, the relationships, the activities, the intentions all play in such a way that it is just an ever increasing, deepening experience of loving ecstasy. And the various kind of Vedic texts, particularly when we read the Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam, they are explaining Vedanta Sutra and saying, here is actually what Vedanta Sutra will feel like when you get there. Vedanta is a lot of philosophy. It's summarizing the Upanishads. But if you really want to kind of get a glimpse of what that would look like, then the words and the texts of the Puranas, particularly the book that is considered to be the most important of all the Puranas, the Srimad Bhagavatam, it actually describes what, gives an inkling of what it would be like to experience consciousness like that. So as we say, don't get off the Vedanta train too early. There's a long way for all of us to go in this journey. And I mean it when I say that when we come to at least understand the need to think of ourselves in a non-dual way, that is realization to be celebrated. That is a blessing of your own intelligence. And it's now enables you to have the foundation for continuing on your spiritual journey. But there is so much more ecstasy and fun to be enjoyed within this. So I hope that those who may be exploring Krishna consciousness in an early stage will continue to hang out with the devotees here, continue with the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra, which really helps to surround ourselves with the spiritual sound vibration that not only just helps us to think clearly, but actually gives us a little glimpse into what spiritual reality feels like and what it is all about. Well, we've got a few minutes before we enjoy the next activity. So we've got any points or questions? You got a...
Unfortunately, it's not working.
Okay, shout out please.
So, Prabhu, you told that activities don't depend on the time factor. So, I remember Prabhupada said how long it takes to become Krishna conscious, and he said it can happen in one moment or not even in many lifetimes. So it seems it depends on our intention, on our eagerness, on our prayers, desires. So what pretends, this relation between how long it takes to become Krishna conscious, why it's not happening now, and why is we think, if I chant long enough, 10 years, then I just have to do it longer, and then I will be Krishna conscious. You know what I want to... Yeah.
It's Prabhupada's point is that it's actually based on your own heart. I just realized a major omission in what I've just been talking about. I didn't explain, okay, well, if we're not this body, and we're not the ahankara, who are we? What is our spiritual identity? And let me do that as a way of coming to your question. The identity that is there, given to us in the Bhagavad Gita, is that we are eternal spiritual beings, And we are eternally related to the supreme whole, Krishna. Krishna is the source of all existence. He's the totality of all existence. We are part of that, but we are individuals who are able to relate to Krishna as the supreme individual, the supreme, and we use this phrase, the supreme personality of Godhead. We shouldn't think that God is just energy or light or love. God is the personality most perfect in love, and therefore the most lovable being. And that's why we use this name Krishna, the all-attractive. The person who can attract our hearts the most, who can fulfill our desire for love on the spiritual plane more than anyone. Now, therefore the question is that you're asking is, how quickly can I open my heart to love? It could be in this moment, but something may be holding me back. We've all got these hang-ups, these hesitations. Things, well, if I gave my heart to Krishna, would it be all right? You know? You know, there's so many kind of pop songs like that. If I give you my heart, will you break it, you know? You know? And that's the trouble, that's our experience in this lousy world. You know, other humans are breaking our hearts. And you know what, every time that happens, trust is lost. So here we are coming to spiritual life with our hearts already shattered by our experiences in this world. Broken so many times, hurt so many times. That's why the idea of not relating to a personality of Godhead actually is attractive. Much better if God's just a energy, love. You know, maybe I can tap into that love without having a person that I'm relating to, because I don't even trust God to be a good enough source of love and to look after my heart. That's the problem. We don't, you know, we're so broken. That's why it takes time. That's why we chant again and again, regularly. Because each time we chant, we kind of go, well, it wasn't bad, Krishna. That was nice. Yes, I like that. Yeah. And next time, yeah, that was sweet. Yeah. And eventually our hearts just become softened, healed. And then we can turn to Krishna and go, Krishna, I'm yours. Completely. So that's what it's all about. It's all about what our heart is willing to do to Krishna. Any other thoughts, comments? I think we're good. Well, thank you very much. And I'll hand over to the maestros here in the temple. They'll guide you through the next part of the program. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Jagannath Subhadra Baladev ki jai. Shri Gaura ki jai. Krishna.
Thank you very much, Tirakandi Prabhu. And if you enjoyed as heavily as me, then please do also visit us on next Saturday. Morning class, Bhagavatam class, Prabhu will be speaking, and also online. There's a lot of material actually. Akandi Prabhu made a lot of effort to make this knowledge available to all of us in a very concise form. And if you check it out on internet and YouTube, I think the Atma Paradigm, is that where you find the most extensive material of his. You will find a lot of interesting things. So now there will be a prasadam feast served for all of you. Please don't hesitate to be taking very lively from that. And then if you feel like you need to do some active service to also give yourself to Krishna a little bit, you can help in the kitchen. We will always, at 6 o'clock, we meet there to have some Küchenspaß mit Vaishnavas, we say in German. It rhymes very nicely. So please do not hesitate. And for the prasadam also, we request it's on donation basis. So you can give as much as you can. But in order for us to provide a Sunday feast every week, we also need a certain amount. So please, if you can, give a little more. We say like 10 francs per meal is very good. So, thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Yes, although it's not necessarily that you will come to Ramananda as a master. So, but if you got the understanding that I am not upright, I am a spiritual being, then that is enough as a foundation. You may not have the full realization, you don't have to become or realize. You just have to have that understanding in order to say, all right, now I can understand my spiritual identity, eternal separation. And I engage in that in bhakti. And bhakti will take you very quickly past Ramananda to Prema, which is a whole different level.